Hello, Richard.
Hi,
How
how
are
are
you?
you?
How are you, sir?
I'm well, and you?
I'm very well on this lovely Thursday evening, if I do say so myself. And this
Yeah.
is the first interview I've done because I've done over 50 interviews. The first interview I've done, we're both in the same time zone. Uh,
Well, that's a good thing.
it is definitely a good thing. My goodness, Richard, you have worn many suits. What I mean by that, you have done, a lot of business, especially chief meteorologist on air and mid or actually maritime global television Halifax in 2007. My goodness, you were an interactive writer instructor and GED instructor at NSCC from 1999 until 2003. So that means you finished that role 20 years ago. I mean, my goodness. And of course, you're also on one of the biggest syndicated shows back from 1990 until 95. Although it only lasts for 5 years, it was still a very interesting show, and that was called Wonder Why. My goodness. So I guess my first question is, how are you doing these days?
Well, I'm well. I think is the answer. There's still so much to be done. I continue to write. I continue to lecture. I'm an academic. I do papers. I've got some new books coming out. Um, Hopefully, I'll be doing some podcasts with uh, another meteorologist, Tina Simkin, coming up about what to do for the climate crisis that we're in. Looking forward to continuing my political activities. I was the shadow cabinet in the GPC, the Green Party of Canada. I was the climate change critic and then the climate renewal critic, both under Elizabeth May and Annamie Paul. And I was a city councillor, and I think I might think about that again as well. It's it, Life is interesting, and there's so much to be done. So I guess that's it in a nutshell. And I enjoy what's around me, and I hope we can keep it together long enough so that we can solve some of the problems we have.
Well said, Richard. Well said. And to add to that, you think of the weather, for example, what it was 30 some years ago compared to today. I remember going out in the snow, and the snow would be this, high off the ground. I mean, and I'm sure you can remember snow being higher than that back in your day as well. Um,
Yeah.
you know what? Even these past winters, I've been seeing less tobogganing and all that. It's not like what it used to be. The weather is just not what it used to be with snow. People say, "Oh my goodness, look at the snow today." I keep saying it never was always like that. I mean, I've been around for, 40 some years of my life, and I remember snow higher than that. So, I mean, I guess what my question is that part of climate change? Can we use that as a part of climate change?
Yes and no.
Okay.
The yes part of it is right now,
Mhm.
it appears that pretty much all parts of Canada and the Northern Hemisphere, especially the Arctic, and then again into the Southern Hemisphere, are warming up. But what's happening now, what I'm really worried about, is two things. One is the El Nino phenomena, which happens in the Pacific, and we're just experiencing one now. If we get a very strong El Nino, then that tends to dampen the winters, but we're also getting a huge melt happening in Greenland. And that fresh water is lighter than the salt water, and it covers up the Gulf Stream. And so we get 25% of our heat budget from the Gulf Stream. If the Gulf Stream wasn't there, you'd have your wish for awful winters. It'd be like
Wow.
Moosonee
Wow.
in northern Ontario on the shores of Hudson Bay. So we would freeze solid. And right now, the Gulf Stream, or the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridian Ocean Current, is the weakest that we've ever measured it.
Wow.
And that's because of the Greenland ice melt. So we might be doing a jog right back to the, well, I'll say the good old days when winter was winter. And that means lots of snow, lots of cold temperatures, not only for the Maritimes and Atlantic Canada, but also pushing into Northern Europe. So you'll wind up with a mini ice age happening as the rest of the world heats up.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. But also
Yeah.
good information to know, though. My goodness. I mean, so much good information to know here. Now let's talk about the Science Files, which is a book that was written by you. Now, I'm assuming that this book is about, questions about science, people ask every day.
That's exactly it. I started the Science Files with Andrew Crystal back in 2004, I guess, 2003, 2004, when News 95.7 started in Halifax, Moncton, St. John. And Andrew Crystal was the progenitor, so to speak, of the Science Files, because there would always, weather's a very science oriented thing. And so I was doing the weather, and I'd be talking about hurricanes or fires or how things happen. And he suggested that we do a talk show about science. And my first reaction to it was abject fear. It's one thing to prepare something about science. It's another to answer things on the fly and open up the telephone lines and say, ask your questions. I will try to answer them. And I thought, maybe we're going down a bad rabbit hole here. And what I discovered is that people really don't want an answer. What they want to do is talk about science. It's just like this interview. It's not about the answers. It's about the questions and the answers, the dialogue, the back and forth, and how people feel about things. And so very often, if I couldn't answer the question, I could tell them where to look for it. But most often, it was the dialogue, or the questions were surprisingly simple, like, why is the sky blue? Or why is bubble gum sticky to your fingers and not to your teeth?
Right.
Or why does certain things coming out of you stink and others don't?
Right. Exactly.
And those questions are quite easy. They have easy answers. They've been researched, and I read a lot of science. That my undergraduate and first work in my master's were in physics, and so it's a strong science background that I have. And of course, my later work was in education academically, when I did a master's in research, and then I did my PhD work in education, again, specifically about climate change in the media. So the whole Science Files thing was about talking with people to get their perspectives, and some of their questions were just amazing. And it just points to the ever-present curiosity that people have to engage in conversation. One of the things that radio does, especially talk radio, is allow people a certain amount of anonymity to ask the questions they might feel embarrassed to ask about. They feel stupid asking it. Right. And if you're just saying, oh, this is Fred on the phone, why is this happening? Why is the sky blue? Or what shape are raindrops? I've always wondered. And I just didn't have the time to look at it. I just want to get your input on it and point me in the right direction. And then all of a sudden you've got a dialogue happening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for example, why is the weather in Cape Breton or even Halifax cold in December, where if you rode in California, you'd be warm as toast, you know?
Yeah, it's surprisingly, it has nothing to do with how close the Earth is to the sun, because we're actually closer to the sun in the wintertime than we are in the summertime in the northern hemisphere.
Wow.
It has to do with the
Now that
tilt.
I didn't know, Richard. Thank you.
Yeah, the southern hemisphere tends to be warmer
Okay.
on the land masses than the northern hemisphere in their summer, because they're actually closer to the sun,
Mhm.
and the tilt pushes them into direct sunlight, so the sunlight isn't oblique. And our summer, we're further away,
Right.
and we're tilted towards the sun. So it's the tilt that has everything to do with it. We're tilted at 23 and a quarter degrees. And of course, we're coming up to the autumnal equinox,
Mhm.
and that means that we'll have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness on the 21st or thereabouts of September, which is happening really quickly. And so all parts of the Earth will have, it'll be pretty much direct sunlight, as direct as you can get.
Wow. Wow, amazing. Oh,
Mm.
all these questions with great answers too. I mean, it's good to know this stuff. This is very important information for people to know.
Well, what's interesting is that as adults, we get pushed away from science.
Mhm.
And that's why I did the children's show. I did Wonder Why, and then I did the Adventures of the Aftermath Crew, and then we did a series of 65 little shorts called Wise Weatherwise. And they all aired on TVO, CTV, were sold around the world. And there's a great hunger that kids have to learn.
Mhm.
And that gets pushed away from adults. You don't want to appear stupid by asking the question.
Yeah,
And a
exactly.
lot of adults feel that if they ask a question, they're telling people they're stupid, when in actual fact,
Oh, it's
questions are how we learn.
well, exactly. I mean, even if a next question I was about to ask you was silly, and of course you'd answer it. But with that being said, to me, I felt it was a question I needed answered. So that's
Yeah,
how it goes.
that's really what people want. They want the engagement, and they want the security of being able to have that discourse without being talked down to or made to be made to feel stupid,
Yes,
and have those answers there. And people do better with other people. I mean, you
they
can
do.
sit. I'm sort of a basement troll. You can see my office here.
Yeah, I
And,
could definitely. Yeah, it's a pretty big
my
office. My goodness. Okay. Wow.
so
Wow.
I like books.
Oh, I see. Wow.
So
You got a lot of
anyway,
books there. What can I say?
yeah, and I've culled this. At one point, I had about 3,000 books here,
Yeah.
and turns out I wasn't touching some of them
Right.
for years, and so they're off at some bookstore. But basically, it's mostly climate change and physics education and understanding our world around us. And it's about communications. And you'd mentioned that I taught communications at Nova Scotia Community College, but I also taught it at Mount St. Vincent.
Yep.
And I taught in the faculty, I was a professor in the Faculty of Engineering,
Wow.
teaching engineering students the importance of communication. And it's funny. When you sit down with a science-oriented group that engineers are, many young engineering students, think that communication isn't important. And then you start pointing out, so how do you get your ideas across?
Yeah.
You know, you're getting those ideas across to your boss, or getting ideas across to a client, or getting across your ideas to someone who is funding this, or the public, are all different ways of communicating. And so that's also the part of what the Science Files and the shows that I did and the documentaries that I did. And I traveled around the world doing these documentaries for 20 years for Discovery Channel, Vision TV, TV Ontario, all sorts of broadcasters. And it was always about engaging the public.
Wow. Public communications. That's good.
Yeah, that's what you're doing.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. I've been doing this since 2013. So actually Saturday past I don't know if you saw it on my Facebook, was my 10th anniversary in interviewing.
Yes, I did see that. I
Yeah,
did see that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that.
I'm a little longer in the tooth than you are.
Well, you are, and but it's still good. It's still good. It's still good.
Well, I'm under the old fart category.
As they say, yeah. Oh,
I'm always surprised when I look at old people and I turn out to be the same age as them.
yeah.
So
Oh,
it's
it's
it's uh, it happens to most people. You either
well,
get older or you don't.
well,
Um,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Not saying your age, but which I know what it is, but you don't look your age. I will say that you look I would put you in early 40s.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, you've been kissing the Blarney Stone. Uh, it's well, it's sort of the luck of the draw. One of the things that you can see, I've got gray here, but not much up here, which is weird.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
since we're on that topic of hair, I will say that I do keep my hair at a professional color to patch up the gray hairs. So there you go. There you go. There you go.
I get accused of it, but I don't. I just getting thinner and thinner. That's um, uh, that seems to be the way it goes. I get fatter and my hair gets thinner.
Oh yeah, that's funny. I remember when we first. I think I sent you a message one time or something, and
Mhm.
when I first started, and of course, I'm sure you've got messages like that before, saying how old are you? And you know what you said? 104. That was
Yeah.
cute. That was cute. That was.
You know where that came from?
I don't
There
know
used to
where.
be a CBC show called The
Okay.
Forest Rangers.
Oh, okay.
Way back when, way before your time, back in the late 50s, early 60s.
Mhm.
And it was a serial show that ran in the afternoon. And there was an old character on there, and I don't know who it was. And he was older than forever.
Yeah.
And when they asked him his age, he would say 104.
Wow.
So I plagiarized it, stole it, and made it my own.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right on, right on, right on. It's all good. It's all good. I guess my next question is, what was it like being chief meteorologist and science specialist on ATV Halifax from 1988 until 94? And of course, back in those days, we had Steve Murphy, we had Bruce Graham back in those days, and before your time as meteorologist, we had Laura Lee Langley.
That's right. And Dwayne Lowe was on ASN.
Yep.
It was quite a lively crew.
Yeah.
I had been chief meteorologist at CBC in Windsor, Ontario. And one of the attractive things about switching over to CTV was the fact that we had talked about doing a children's science show. And CBC wanted me to do the weather in Halifax under News World, which was starting up in 1988. And Joan Donaldson, who was head of News World, and Mike Harris had offered me a position with them. And I knew I was coming to Halifax and I was looking forward to it. But I chose ATV specifically because we were going to do a science show and that I would be able to host it, produce it, direct it, write it, all that kind of stuff, and put it together.
Wow.
So we did. So we spent 5 years doing the 65 episodes, and it was syndicated. And I actually did a talk in a place called Al Ain, which is in the Emirates, on the law of the sea. I was talking about climate change, and this was about 30 years ago. So just in the late 1990s. And I was in the elevator in Al Ain, and a gentleman gets in. He has all the Emirati Muslim garb, and he turns to me and he says, "You're Richard Zurawski." And I go, "What? I'm on the other side of the world. How on earth would you know this?" And
Yeah.
he said, "My daughter watches your show. Wonder why?" And so it was on the air. It sold to more than 200 countries.
Wow.
Yeah.
Syndicated. Syndicated.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, I didn't have any residual rights or anything like that. So I'm not in the class of Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, but it was nice. Children's programming is so important because they get their information from everywhere, and to be able to have something that represents science
Yep.
in a fun way was very important to me, and that's why I chose ATV.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Do you miss those years, if I may ask?
Uh, no, my sense of value was never in the media.
Right.
Um, for many people, getting into the media is about notoriety, like becoming famous. How do you look? All that kind of stuff. My sense of values were never in that. I was a meteorologist. I worked with Environment Canada in Windsor, Ontario, and then CBC picked me up because their weather boy decided he wanted to be a newsreader and they needed a new weather boy. So they called me up and said, how'd you like to do this? And we'll offer you a lot more money. And I thought, well, this would be fun. But my sense of values was in the science. And I was doing a master's in physics at the time at the University of Windsor. So all my sense of values weren't in the media, they were in the content. And in many ways, it's like pushing a rope up a hill because much of the media is ambulance chasing or responding to emergencies or responding to immediate news and not looking at the underlying things. And that's what my studies have been in the media, is about how it functions and why today we have such difficulty with some of the sciences, like the science behind COVID, the science behind climate change, the science behind vaccinations. And those are the things that we're seeking to understand. So no, my sense of values weren't there, but I enjoyed my time there. And it was also because it's television, you really can't hide. If you went to a restaurant or if you went out, you had to carry this kind of cardboard cutout of yourself that it sometimes got in the way. You just couldn't be yourself in many ways. And no, I don't miss it. That is the short answer.
I mean, you seem to me to be a very nice person, a fine gentleman, but you also have your private life too. You like to keep. Is that?
I'm kind of crusty sometimes,
Yeah,
it's,
you have to be. You have to be. You have to be.
yeah.
Especially, being in the media. I'm like that too in the internet media. Where I do a lot of interviews. Zoom. A lot of them are by
Yeah.
Zoom, and yes, you have your people to make happy, but another side of it is don't give them too much information. And Facebook nowadays, I mean, a big, giant, worldwide thing. Sometimes I don't think people really think about when they type on their status and they push that enter button that, okay, once I push that enter button, it's all over. I can erase it, but I can't erase it. It's on there forever. So, I mean, social media is good in one way, but Richard, it can be scary in another.
You've said a mouthful because we've entered a different era where it's difficult to determine what's truthful, what's not truthful, what's going to be used out of context, what is going to be used in times. For instance, I was a different person 50 years ago than I am today.
Right.
And something that I might have said 50 years ago wouldn't be not saying that I said something 50 years ago, but
True.
what you might have said 50 years ago may not be acceptable in the same context
Oh no.
today, but because society has changed. And there are sensitivities that have changed. And that's an important issue. So you're now an open book all the time. And sometimes you just want to let your hair down. And in my case, what little you've got left, you let down.
True, true.
And you just want to put your feet up and relax and not have to deal with the public persona per se.
Exactly.
And you know, you're right. There is a private and there is a public thing. And it used to be a lot easier to delineate the two, to differentiate between the two.
True. And that goes back to the world changing, as we all know. Honestly, stuff that they may post, like what they had for dinner or supper, with all due respect, that really doesn't interest me. I'm not interested to see what that my neighbor had KFC for supper and post on Facebook. It's nice, but I'm not interested in seeing that. I mean, it's food. That's it, you know. But people do that. That's the thing, you know. And of course, Instagram, same thing. So I mean, you know, the world has changed, but I'm old school, just like you are, and I know the importance of appropriateness, and I know what's appropriate to put on for show and what's not so appropriate to put on. So that's the thing we have to know. We have to balance that, Richard.
And that is something that a lot of people don't understand about the media. For those of us that got into traditional media, you got a quick education of how you had to balance that. But for some people, for many people who get into things like Facebook and Twitter and then other platforms,
TikTok,
all that kind of stuff, you're right. Once it's said, it can't be retried. It's not like an argument or a discussion with someone down the street where you can go back later and say, listen, I misspoke, or listen, you know, it was in the heat of the moment, or I had a chance to think about it.
Right.
You're taken at face value. And there are different modes of communication. Writing a book is different than writing Twitter. And writing a book, I get to articulate things in a particular way that I hope will cover most of what I'm trying to think about. If I'm doing Twitter or TikTok, there's a limited number of words, my attention span, that kind of thing. And you get buffeted by everybody else commenting while you're writing it.
Exactly.
And those discourses filter certain things out. It's the difference between a phone conversation and an in-person conversation, or a Zoom conversation, or being with the person. Now, a Zoom conversation like this offers so much more because you get to see where I'm sitting, you get to see my expressions, you know, that kind of thing. And there's a to and fro between the visual and the sound. But at the same time, all the body language, all the other stuff that we rely on to make our decisions are missing.
Exactly.
And so you have to adapt, and you have to learn to adapt. But things are changing so quickly that it's very difficult for many people to adapt to that. And they get caught. And you wind up having to backpedal or never recover. I mean, careers have been lost for misstatements.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Richard, I just want to thank you so much for having this conversation with me today, and, you know, learning me a lot that I didn't know about science. And also, I'm glad we're on the same page when it comes to social media. But I'd like to thank you so much for taking time to speak with me this evening. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to be publishing this interview in the paper. So can I mention any of your upcoming books?
Well, I'm doing a book on climate change.
Okay. Awesome.
Which is what is Nova Scotia going to look like in 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And I've written a science fiction book, which I've got publishers interested in, and it's a 3-book series, and it's called Kenotaphian, and it's a bit dystopian, but it'll be interesting, I hope.
Wow. Well, Richard, thanks so much for your time. All the best to you, and take care.
You too. Thank you so much, Jack.
My pleasure.